And now we are going over to something called FINE, Family Infant Neurobehavioral Education. And the first presenter and also the developer of FINE is Ms. Inga Warren here, who is very well known to, I think, everyone here. Inga is a senior NIDCAP trainer from the beginning, an occupational therapist.
True.
And now you're affiliated with the University College of London, where you proceed your studies.
Yeah.
And we look very much forward to hearing about
you.
this. Thank you. I have it here.
Okay, are we all set?
Okay.
All right. Okay, thank you for inviting me back to tell you about the next chapter in the FINE program, which is about evaluation. Can you just tell me how many of you were here last year who have been to a presentation, so you've got some idea what I'm talking about? Okay, so a lot of you, if there's any of you that, I can't obviously go into details about the FINE program here, we don't have time for that, but if you want to know more about it, you can ask me afterwards. I want to also point out that, our gratitude to colleagues and parents who have provided feedback along the way as we've developed this program, because we have very much tried to meet their needs, and the feedback we have got from parents and colleagues has been a really important influence. So in a nutshell, the FINE program is designed as a pathway in family and infant neurodevelopmental education. It's an education program, not an implementation program. And the idea is that it has a number of steps, progressive steps, that might lead towards specialist training, NIDCAP being an obvious example, but it could also be for people who are planning to do PhDs or other things. So it begins with an orientation course, which is about a context and background and evidence, and then the second level is much more practice-based and involves assignments in a nursery over time. Those two programs are up and running, and I'm working with Monique and Esther. Where are you? There you are, in the Netherlands, to actually bring this to fulfillment and deliver it. And at the moment it's delivered through NIDCAP centres, but it is appropriate preparation for any kind of developmental program. Level 3 is something we're still working on. So first of all, the first question is, well, how are we doing? It's meant to be an international program. How are we doing? And so the yellow dots here, you probably can't see them very clearly, represent the 11 countries that have been or are currently or about to be engaged in this. And it's been translated already into Swedish and French and German, half translated into Greek, and a Spanish translation is pending. And the white dots are indications of countries who've requested the program but haven't begun yet. So mainly it's clustered around Europe, except for we have a little program here going with 5 people doing the second level of training in New Zealand. So we are reaching quite far because we have inquiries from all over. But at the moment we're mainly centered around Europe. And one of the ways in which we can look at how we're progressing is to use a geographical information system to enter data to show us where the uptake is. We've only done this in the UK at the moment. So what you can see here in this heat map, the level 1, you can see where the hotspots are. They're the sort of yellow and red areas. And you can also see where the deserts are that have got no color at all. So this is very helpful for us in terms of planning. Strategy is thinking about which parts of the country need support and so on. But it's also quite interesting looking at the hotspots, because this one, and this one, these are the 3 areas in the UK where we have more than 2 NIDCAP trained people in one centre. But these 2 hotspots here and here are not. They don't have any NIDCAP trained staff. But what they do is they have champions who are very, very strongly supportive of that model of care. And Carol comes from this one down here, and she's going to talk to us later. And then here we look at what's happening with a heat map showing what's happening with level 2. And again, you can see similar hotspots, except for this one here, where they haven't begun yet. So we're boosting level 2 down here because then they'll have an influence in their region. So when we talk about the competencies, we look at them for this program in the perspective of competencies in relationship to infants, family, and the system. And so we've translated those into our goals for evaluating the program to look at what kind of an impact we might have on those areas. And I'm talking in particular about level 2 because it's we haven't thought a lot about how to evaluate level 1. So if we start thinking about the problem with this is I'm really here hoping that you're going to give me ideas. So I'm here to ask for advice and help and suggestions about how would be the best way to evaluate this, because I don't think we're not there yet at all. I mean, obviously, developmental outcomes for babies, people will say, well, that would be a good outcome measure, but actually that's unrealistic because the units we're working in, the whole program, the way it's delivered, and the units in too many variable, it's too expensive, and it's too difficult to recruit the kind of numbers. So I don't think we can do that. Length of stay is a possibility because you would have retrospective data, so we could look at length of hospital stay before the program was implemented, the training, and afterwards, a period afterwards. It's a possibility, although that tends to be complicated by transfers between units, which in the UK is huge because of the centralisation of level 3 care, and also I can't remember what the other thing is now, what I was going to say. And then maybe we could look at quality of care. We could use quality measures, so audits, looking at perhaps changes in the uptake of kangaroo care, breastfeeding, feeding practices, those sorts of things we might be able to audit. And we might be able to check some of those things with data that's computerized data. Also, the FINE program provides certain tools that are suitable for auditing as well, and one of those is the evaluation of intervention scale, which Acta Pediatrica has just published and put online, which is a way of evaluating how well we do in terms of managing difficult procedures or cares. We could use pain scales, maybe the use of pain scales. We promote the one, the Neo Alps, or the Alps Neo, whichever way around it is, that Agneta and Pierre and others have worked on here. And we have a positioning comfort scale. So we do have various tools in the program itself that could be possible ways of looking. And the other thing that we are going to do is to use the modification of the staff survey, which was used to look at how people perceived the impact of NIDCAP on units here. That was, I think it was 1997 that you first published using that here, and that's also been used in other countries where NIDCAP training has taken place over time, and they have asked people who worked there before it started and then at a later date to say whether or not they think practice has got worse or whether it's unchanged or it's got better. So we have here some of the questions about infant well-being, infant safety, and environment of the infant. So we're looking at that as a possibility, and one of the networks, one of the hotspot areas is in the northeast of England. We're thinking of doing that throughout the whole network to see what comes up. So that's a possibility. What about measuring impact on the family then? I think this is perhaps even more difficult. We could perhaps look at the amount of time people are spending on the neonatal unit after the training has been introduced. But I don't think we have retrospective data that looks at the time. It would just look at how often they came, you know, how many days they were, and how often. So this is a problem with lots of things, is that as the training is implemented often gradually, is not having data to compare with historical data. Thought about parent satisfaction. But I think the general view is that parent satisfaction surveys, parents always evaluate the care positively. So we think probably that's not a good measure to use. Could look at complaints, because most hospitals will record the complaints they've had. And one of the comments that has been made before about implementing a program like NIDCAP is that you get fewer complaints from parents. And we do know some units who are keen to implement the FINE program specifically to reduce the number of complaints they get from parents. So that could be a possibility. Parenting efficacy is another possibility. Parenting activities, look at the daily records to see how much parents have been actually involved in their baby's care. And we could also explore looking back at policies and practices that were reported in the European Science Foundation survey that was in 2006, because we could identify some of the centres that contributed to that. Interviews, open-ended interviews could be another way. And also, I've been thinking quite a bit about the work that you've been doing with the SCENE program and wondering whether this could be a useful way of also looking at as what is happening. So, maybe I want to come back and talk to you about that, Anna, because I think it's a very interesting approach to looking at how parents are involved. What about impact on professionals? I think this is perhaps a little bit easier to do. In the program, we have a self-assessment that's adapted from a self-assessment that Laura Robeson published in 2003. And we started off asking people to evaluate their competence, how to evaluate themselves before and after the program. But of course, we found it's well known that we all overestimate our abilities, and we found that everybody was evaluating themselves so highly they couldn't possibly need any training. So we realized, that was a bit pointless. So we stopped asking them to do it before, but we do ask them to record afterwards whether or not they think it's changed their practice. And of course, they all think it's changed their practice, even though they all thought they didn't need to change in the first place. So we do that, and that data is being collected. And we have a very detailed quantitative, qualitative evaluation form, which is in Rotterdam. They're compiling that data, but it isn't ready for circulation yet. But we hope we will tease out of that what is working best and what we might need to improve on. We're also using an adapted version of Carol Newnham's stressor scale. I don't know if you're familiar with this. This was a project that Carol and Terry Inda did in Australia, where they asked people to rate the degree of stress that various interventions caused the baby. They actually use this in a very nice way by then saying, that if you have a certain number of the most stressful interventions going on in one day, you must give the baby rest. It was a way of actually regulating how much stress babies were put under and controlling that to some extent. But there is the scale that they use lists a whole load of interventions, and then you score how stressful you think it is for the baby, and you also score how stressful you think it is for yourself to either watch or do it. And we're asking people to do that before they start the training, and then again when they finish the training. So we're not quite sure what to expect. Is that maybe people will be more sensitized to the baby's distress after the training, and therefore that will be reflected in the scores. Or maybe the care will be given better, and therefore it won't. Well, we wait to see what data comes out of that. And then in level 2, everybody has a mentor, and they send reflective writings to the mentor, and the mentors can evaluate that. We have a scale for evaluating the reflections, so we can look at that. And the amount of time and effort that mentors feel they have to put in for each student. So that varies a lot, because I'm very experienced at doing the feedback now, so on the whole it doesn't take me very long, but people who are just beginning, it does take a long time. Also, we'll be using the adapted NIDCAP survey, has sections that are relevant to working conditions and so on that we will also be using. And we also are doing a piece of qualitative research using interviews. This is with a researcher called Deanna Gibbs and myself. It's called Exploring the Impact of Fine on the Provision of Developmental Care. It's a qualitative, descriptive, multiple case study design with purposeful sampling. Well, we had I think Deanna's idea was that we would sample the participants, managers, and mentors. I'm not sure about managers because I think there'll start to be an element of participants feeling they're being judged from this. So we're still working out how to do this. And it'll be semi-structured interviews. It'll be transcribed and analysed to look for themes. And we will also review the reflective writing. We're looking for ethics approval for this. And we're hoping that the key findings from this will help us to produce a better evaluation tool for future use. And in France, they have also started to do a similar process of qualitative evaluation of the program. This is in Brest, where they've also started it. And so very helpfully, they've already designed questions for the interviews. And so we will be basing our study on the same questions as they have used. And we hope that other people will do the same because this will provide a much better collection of data. And then lastly, we're looking at changes in practice on the unit. So what kind of changes do we expect to see? How do we measure that? Well, the first two levels are not specifically designed to change practice. They're designed in the unit. They're designed to change individual practice. But what we do expect is that more and more people implement, do the training and change their practice. It will have an impact on the whole unit. So we're gradually looking at that. So, being a good role model is the best way to change practice. As the educators say to me, good behavior is what changes practice. So we're hoping that as individuals improve their practice, that will affect generally. And there are a number of benchmarking measures that can be used for this. The one in the UK is the Bliss Family Friendly Accreditation Scheme, which has a number of criteria, and Bliss actually support the FINE programme as a national curriculum in the UK in order to support the BFFAS. The NIDCAP Nursery for a Certification Programme could be another benchmarking tool. We also have site assessments in the programme. I'll come back to that. We might also, when the EFCNI standards are produced, they may be a tool that we could also use. The survey of staff we've talked about before. We also thought it would be interesting to look at whether or not units have developmental care teams and how active those developmental care teams are, and whether that has changed over the training period. And also interviews might be an idea. So the finer site assessment tools, we have about 9 checklists that people can use, and they can score their totals as percentages of they can score percentages, and how people have been doing this since the 1990s. We had first introduced these checklists, and various units were using them, and how they used them was to make pie charts that you can see with this one, for example. It's fictitious, but you could see in this one, one of them relates to noise. You can see they're very bad on noise, but they're much better on kangaroo care and lighting. So they could look at, it gave them a picture of where their strengths were and where their main challenges were and what they had to do. So that's how it's been used in the past. But now what in the program itself, they have these checklists and the percentages, and they all score them at level 2, and they could go back and score them again later to see whether or not they've improved. So that's one thing. So to finish off then, what are the challenges for us that we have to address to do this? And one of them is this issue of before and after data. Now, some centres have made a block decision about their wanting to do this, and they're recruiting large numbers of people to do the programme in a block. So then you can have a kind of before and after measure. But in the UK, it's more trickling through, and then it's much more difficult. And of course, you have huge variability of sites, anything from 12 to 200 beds units that are in, or 6, I think. One of the smallest units been involved had 6 beds, the largest one had 200. So you have huge variability of sites and participants. And we don't have any money, actually, and we don't have any resources to do research. So that's, of course, the other problem. So any suggestions that you have will be very welcome.